Internets, welcome back to another episode of Sultans and Sneakers. I'm your host, as always, Mahin the podcaster, and today I am welcomed by Art from the Spiritual Mutt blog. Art, thanks for coming on. Art is calling in from somewhere in Northeast Ohio. I'll keep your location kind of discreet, but
Gotcha.
thanks for coming on the show, man.
Yeah, good to be here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I was have you ever done podcasts before? This is your first interview.
I've never done a podcast. We've done a little bit of Zoom calling just because of COVID, but yeah,
Sure.
this is a first.
Okay, well, cool. Well, hopefully the first time you enjoy it. Just checking make sure all the settings are set and everything. But yeah, man, I actually I came across your blog. I want to say 6 months ago, maybe longer. I don't recall. And I left a comment. And if I recall, the way I found your blog was, I was I think I was Googling something about Unitarian Christianity. I don't know if you're familiar with like Dr. Dale Tuggy and Sir
Oh
Anthony
yeah,
Buzzard. Um,
Trinity's. Yeah, is he the one that does the Trinity's website?
the Trinity's podcast, right? That's
Yeah,
Tuggy.
yeah.
And I forgot and I was just Googling, and then I was also trying to understand what Eastern Orthodox Christianity was a little bit, because I got a good friend of mine that used to work for me. He's a Macedonian Eastern Orthodox, but
Okay.
when I would ask him questions about it, he really didn't have any answers. It was like, kind of like, oh, it's part of my family, but it's not something that I never like research myself. We just do it because it's in the family kind of thing, right?
Sure,
So I
sure.
came across your blog, and then my impression was, and I don't know if this is the kind of impression you get, is like somebody who was really, you seem to be very transparent about your own faith journey. And
Oh
then
yeah.
I found out you had done some, research into Islam, which I'm a Muslim, right?
Yep.
And I feel like you give some very honest takes as a Christian, um, for the Muslim. There's like nothing polemical. There's a lot of
No.
respect. Um, and I was like, this is someone that I might want to have on my podcast, because my
Yeah.
podcast is about, this channel at least, is about understanding why do people believe what they believe, and kind of exploring that question. And even when I read about like some of your, if people ask you like, why haven't you converted to Islam, etc., etc., some of your answers are actually very like honest, and I can understand that.
Yeah.
It's not something that like maybe that would like cause me to question, but I could see how it could cause someone else into question. So
Sure,
that's
sure.
why I was hoping to reach out, and just like, I'm glad you accepted the invite, and hopefully we can have a great, a nice convo here, and share some things.
Yeah, I enjoy this stuff. It's something I've done my entire life.
Yeah.
So I enjoy the conversations. I'm not into the polemics and the arguing. I just that doesn't help anybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's sometimes it's you get caught. I'll give you. I'll start with this. I remember I did a podcast with a Pentecostal pastor and one of
Hmm.
his elders, maybe over the summer. It was regards to a situation where they had taken a stance against with one of their family restaurants in
Oh,
Chicago.
you had said I started to watch that. I did not get very
Yeah.
far into it, but
And I think that and so I was a frequent patron of that restaurant,
okay,
because
okay,
they had like halal food, even though the owners weren't Muslim, right?
yeah,
Um so it was, and I had built, the owner would always see me, we'd chat, etc. I knew he was a Christian, but he was never really like aggressive or in that sense. You know what I'm saying? He was
yeah,
always kind of like, we would talk here and there. He'd ask me about certain things. Interestingly enough, his dad was a Muslim. Okay.
okay,
Now they say that his dad converted to Christianity in his deathbed, but only
okay,
God knows, as far as I'm concerned. But
sure,
um, I think that when that happened, they were forced to like kind of put their Christianity out in the forefront, and it was a kind of like, I don't know how typical, but a very they're Pentecostal theologically, but also very much in line with like the Trump event, like the very
hmm,
conservative politically, protesting outside of Planned Parenthood, calling people demons, and that kind of thing.
yep,
Um, and that's kind of what got the restaurant in trouble, because of the stance of the church against Black Lives Matter and the BLM platform, which is which to me, I understood the reasoning. It didn't like it wasn't a shocking thing for me, right?
That they
So
what that they stood up for it, you mean,
that they
or what
stood
their where
against
their stance
BLM.
was?
Yeah, because BLM, the idea that the organization is founded by these transgender women, and they have this. There is this narrative out there that many people of faith seem to have a, concern about that, so to speak, right?
Sure.
I don't necessarily agree with all the points, but I could see where they're coming from. So long story short, is I invited them on the show. Um, what started was is I came on. Um, I did a podcast with a couple of friends of mine, and we were talking about the restaurant, the closure. And one of the things that like got the restaurant in trouble was that the owner's brother, who's the elder who came on my show, he made a
Okay.
post saying that like um, Roman Catholicism is evil, Islam is evil, atheism
I
is
got you.
evil, feminism is all this stuff is evil, and my thing was, although as a Muslim, I didn't like to hear it. I also was like, I can understand why he would say that if I'm understanding correctly. So we kind of fleshed it out. We had him on the show,
Okay.
and we had a respectful dialogue. However, we continued to get her like, hey man, we should talk some more. So we talked offline several
All
times,
right.
and it became more like, well, I don't think this is really going anywhere because you're now trying to tell me about my religion is wrong, and your sources are people like David Wood. I don't know if you're familiar with David Wood, right?
I not
Yeah. So these people in the polemic sphere. And then it's like,
got you.
and I'm like, listen, man, at least when I try to learn Christianity, I've always tried to learn Christianity on Christianity's terms. Like it doesn't make no sense to me to listen to read to get my main view of Christianity from a Muslim scholar. Like that
Yeah,
doesn't make
and
any
same.
that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes I might go there for insights, but like you start to figure out like, okay, if stuff's well, that's not really what they believe, and I think what happens is sometimes we get into these straw man arguments where we like build up a straw man about what this other religion
Arguing against.
is,
Yeah, yeah. Yep.
and then you're like, oh well, that's not really what that is. So what's the point of the conversation, right? So but that's where it kind of getting that polemics, and I was like, you know what, I'm good with this. So right now we're like, hey, I'm ready to talk to you guys are willing to talk, but like at the same time, it can't be a one way where
Right.
oh everything's in the Bible and because like I've read some of the Gospels and stuff. But I want to start with you, man. Like, what's your
Sure.
background growing up? Like, what was your faith tradition as a kid?
Well, I call my faith, I call it the submarine
Yeah.
religion
Okay.
because we would surface for air on Easter and Christmas. I
Okay.
mean, otherwise, it really wasn't a big part of our life. I was raised Presbyterian. We went to church every Sunday, and it's same thing you had mentioned before. It's just sort of what you did.
Right.
Um, I can tell you the idea of God was always there, even from a young age. And then as I got a little bit older and as I started to travel, really my first venture into what I would call a faith tradition is I veered towards, we call them the Eastern traditions. And the big one that hooked me was Taoism. And I say
Mm.
that's really where I entered the
Oh,
stream,
Eastern,
is how I
Eastern. Because when you say Eastern, I'm always thinking about Eastern Orthodoxy.
I understand. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So Eastern religions,
Sure.
that's coming from a Western civilization point of view, but it was
Right.
really Taoism, the book, the Tao Te Ching. Originally, I picked it up because I thought it was cool, the little yin yang symbol, and I was trying to
Mm.
be cool and all that stuff. Um, and there's a long story as to how, that book. But anyhow, that's how I entered the stream, is how I put it. And truthfully, Taoism, or the Taoist interest I had, was it's more philosophical than it is religion. I know there's a religion that offshoots from that with the gods and all this stuff. I never went down there. So for a long time, it was Taoism. Um,
But like, what triggered that? Like, can you recall like, were you looking for something at the time, or
not I was probably not overtly, but looking back in hindsight, my whole passion, my whole pursuit of everything, even the stumbles and the failings, I've always been after or truth, I guess you could say, whatever that looks like, whatever that means. It was real nebulous as I was young, but that hunger, that drive, that passion was always there. Um, I can't tell you why it was there. I can't tell you exactly why I chose what I chose, and what the interest was there. Um, it was just always something that was there. Um, I'm a thinker, I like to philosophize. What is the truth? What's out there? I'm a researcher. And I think it just got its hooks in me. And as time went on, then I got into religious studies and studying other religions and other faiths. Joseph Campbell, The Power of Myth. So you start going down all these different paths, and it opens your eyes to different spiritual paths and traditions. And being curious by nature, I would chase this just to try to understand it. So it's sort of a hodgepodge of different things. I guess, in hindsight, just trying to piece it together. What is that truth that I'm seeking? What does that truth actually look like? How can I frame it, and how can I speak about it?
So obviously coming from the point of view that there has to be some kind of, we live in this world where everyone is like, this is my truth and this is your truth, that
Right.
there must be some kind of ultimate truth
Yeah.
at the end of the day, right? And
Yep.
how can we, arrive at that? So that's the question. So I guess when you're reading these books, you're reading these philosophies, is it like, do you understand that you're already operating from a point of view of like whatever your background is? Because that's how we're all biased by our own backgrounds, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So is there like so when you would process these philosophies, now you never fully embraced Taoism from what you're saying, right? You just kind of like studied it, you were interested in certain aspects of it.
Yeah. And like you said, so the way I like to learn, whatever I learn, I want to understand it on its own terms as best you can. And obviously, unless you're fully immersed in it, there's only so far you can go.
Mm-hmm.
And I recognize that. So it was, and I've got books. You'll find the books that I use and the books that I really like. I've got a copy of the Tao Te Ching. I highlight, rabbit ears, underline, self-reference within. I mean, I really, really, really absorbed that book. And I think I have a really pretty good grasp of the book. I can't say I understand Taoism as a whole, because obviously it's a lot larger than one book. But yeah, that my whole motive was I want to understand it on its own terms, not I'm going to read into it. I'm aware of that we do that, like you said, from our backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
So my whole pursuit in anything that I do, whether it's spiritual, religious, whatever, or if it's work, if it's something else out there, I want to understand it as it should be understood on its own terms. I don't like
Absolutely.
reading into stuff as if I can.
I don't. Is our practice is what's the proper term for a person who practices Taoism? A Tao, like what's their what
I
do you
guess
call
a
them?
Taoist was
Okay,
what you would call them. Just throw an IST on it.
yeah. Now is there a community of that in the United States of them?
There
Could you
might
find?
be. I have no idea. This was all just me with
Yeah.
that book.
So it's like
Um,
it's really just grabbing a book and then like so it does limit the immersion aspect, right? Because
Absolutely, yeah,
part
because
of it
there's no
is like
community.
you have to find a community, and that's what like I think the larger religions we tend to have like those communities. Now then
Right.
you can get into segments and sects and all that kind of stuff. But okay, so um after you did that, what was next for you?
I'd have to really think that through. I don't know. So I went through some personal struggles. So let's
Sure.
just say things were a little hazy and a little fuzzy during
Mm-hmm.
that period of time. But somewhere within that period of time, um, I'd be hard to pinpoint exactly where, but I started to be interested more in, I guess you could just, generically say God, that sense that there is a being, a personal something out there. Um, and so, of course, I probably just defaulted back to Christianity because it's what I knew. So you get the Bible and you start reading these different books and all of this stuff. The take I took on, I had a really weird journey through Christianity because at some point I started to try to completely disprove it. I would read these books in an effort to write it off, to find the faults, to find the things that were wrong with it, and to try to actually disprove it. And I've got volumes and volumes and volumes of stuff that I've written and I've read where they would pick apart these verses and what it meant, and oh, they're really drawing from I don't know, Isis or Osiris, or all of these polemical things. I
Mm-hmm.
really went deep down that rabbit hole. um,
But why? What was your intent behind trying to like deconstruct it essentially? What were you looking to do? Why was that the end goal?
I think Same, I probably because people in your path, and I've got there's people that in my path would, they try to, I guess, convert you, or hey, you need Jesus or whatever, and it would
Sure.
irritate me. So of
Yeah.
course it was like, okay, I'm not buying that. I got to prove
Hmm.
this for myself. And it was probably partially, I'm like, okay, I need to have an answer for you when you tell me this, why I can just shoot you down.
Right.
And so it's probably that. My whole life is I've always rebelled against stuff. It wasn't until I got a little bit older that I was actually more proactive and intentional in what I did, as opposed to, well, I'm just going to rebel against everything. So it was probably something fundamental in my nature as to why I did that. Um, and so I would read all these polemical books and these books that would try to shoot holes in it and all of that stuff. But I even went to school. I got a degree in religious studies. That's how deep it went, which is, where I got introduced to Islam. We can veer on that tangent.
Sure.
Um, but the funny thing is, by me doing that, I started to actually understand and read the Bible, which was something I had never really done. So now I started to read the Bible deep and in depth and in ways I probably never otherwise would have. And as time went on, all of a sudden I found myself drawn more to it as opposed to drawn away from it or opposed to it.
As you
And I
like,
just,
and did you just open it up and start with Genesis and then go from there, or
no,
did you
I'd
follow like a
really,
Bible study kind of like these books you have there where they have like certain verses?
yeah, I think it would probably be, truthfully, and I'd really have to think this through. I probably started with these polemical books that would find the discrepancies and where the verses are, it seemed to be in conflict with one another. So as opposed to reading the Bible itself, I probably started with these books. And it was only over time in reading these books and then going to refer to these verses and that kind of stuff that I actually started reading the Bible. And I think I've always had, I can't say it's a critical spirit, but it's a spirit. I'm not going to take what somebody tells me. I want to really, really, really understand it as it is. And like you said, maybe deconstruct it. And in the
Hmm.
process of doing that, come to my own understanding of what that actually means.
Hmm.
So it's been it was originally a really very intellectual journey. It's really where it started. It
I
was only
see.
over time that I sort of moved past that and really, I guess you could say, get into the spirit of what it was really all about.
And how many years ago are we talking here when we this started?
Oh,
As far as Christianity goes and like reading the Bible and all this.
probably, man, I don't even know. Had probably mid 90s. I can't
Okay.
say I never read it before that,
All right.
but the real deep dive into it was probably in the mid 90s, maybe a little bit earlier. Probably a lot of it has to do with my now wife.
Yeah.
Um, her parents were ministers,
Hmm.
so she's a PK, a preacher's kid.
Okay. So then
So
just you wanted to go to school for it too, right? So you studied
yeah,
like religion in school in
yeah. So
university?
like in the mid '90s, I actually went. We talk about. I attended a Pentecostal church for a number of years, um, and sometime it's a really strange journey. I've never actually talked about it out loud. I've got
Yeah.
lots of writings on it,
Right.
so feel free to poke and ask. And um, so anyhow, so in the mid '90s, I got baptized in a Pentecostal church, and I was drawn to it because I used to think at church, you have to leave your brain at the door. It's you forget, you leave your mind outside. There's nothing there for the
So
intellect.
let me ask you real quick. So you were born
Sure.
a Presbyterian.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you have to be baptized when you joined this Pentecostal church?
Well, this is because it's part of their faith tradition. This
Okay.
particular faith is you have to be baptized.
Okay.
And so, in dating my wife over time, I attended church with her. And at one point, I felt compelled that this is what I needed to do.
Sure. Makes sense. Okay.
Um, yeah. So then the strange thing is, after that time, so then the pastor, was very intelligent. I think that's what kind of hooked me. Here's a really intelligent, and the way he just broke down the scriptures. And then I had a guy introduce me to, it's called the Strong's Concordance, if you're familiar
Okay.
with that.
I'm not familiar with it. Can you explain it?
Yeah, so the Strong's Concordance is based on the King James version of the Bible. It takes every single English word and it breaks it back into its original Greek, which is what the New Testament was written in, and it breaks it back into the Hebrew, which is what, the Old Testament was written in. So it breaks down the original words and gives the meanings and where you can find them in various places throughout Scripture. So I met this guy who introduced me to the Strong's Concordance, and then once again, that critical spirit is like, okay, I'm going to do this for myself. I'm not going to take what the pastor says as gospel. And there were many in the church who do that. I'm not just this church, but in a lot of churches, whatever the pastor says goes. They don't give it a whole lot more thought. They just accept it as the truth. If it's, he's got some special connection.
Well, it's honest. People do it, I think, because it's just easier.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? I mean, it's kind of like if you're buying life insurance, right? You have all these policies and stuff, and once you find something that makes sense, it's like, you know what, that looks fine. And then everybody else calling you for it, I'm like, oh, this model's better. I'm like, listen, I don't care. Like,
I'm good.
I'm hoping that, like, I trust that this guy hooked me up with something that, like, when I retire, when I die, there's going to be some money there.
Yeah.
And if not, oh well.
I tried.
Yeah, right. So yeah, I think a lot of people in general across all faith traditions, it's kind of like,
absolutely.
Oh, it's because you're working, you've got family and things of that sort. At the same time, though, I think the logical thing is, if you really think about it, we're talking about eternality, right? Salvation. These are like really, really important concepts because
pretty much,
if you think about it, like I just turned 39 a few months ago, and I'm almost like, man, this is like, I'm almost like on the halfway. I don't know. Hopefully I'll exercise and take care of myself, and I can live a long life. But it's I would say the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, died at age 63. And so if I follow that age time frame, right?
Yep.
And I'm like, who am I to like live so I'm already on the second half of my life right now. So I mean, it's interesting how, but it's because it's something that's like not in your face. You know what I mean? Until it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So I started studying and really studying, and then the questions arose. And what happened was, shortly after I was baptized, this is sort of the early days of the internet and the chat forums. And I found this chat forum, and I'm feeling pretty good about myself, Mr. Know-it-all. I'm saved and all that good stuff. So I go on this chat room, and I get asked this question. I don't remember exactly what the question was, but it had to do something with the Bible. And the woman who asked it was someone who had converted to Islam. And in all honesty, she said, "You sound like a Muslim." And I'm going, wait, what? It was the first time I had ever heard that in my I knew of it, but I really never studied it at all. So it was just, something out there somewhere else. And it just really threw a wrench in what I thought. And so the more I got into these, not debates, but chatting about it, asking questions back and forth, she continued, I sounded more like a Muslim. And she kind of had more Sufi, mystical. She was, a different style. But it really got me thinking, and it really got me puzzled that I had to second guess myself. And it really checked me, which was good. You sort of bring you back down to earth. And I think that's where my interest in studying Islam began. And then just over time, I would study that, and the more I studied that, the more I found it just incredibly fascinating. It was something new. There was a lot that resonated with me, and then just as time went on there, it got to the point. That's how I ended up going to school for religious studies. I was like, oh my God, this is comparative religions. I love this stuff. And that's why I ended up going to school, was for comparative religions. And so I went even more deeply into Islam. I became pretty close with my professor. And I went through some more advanced classes where it was literally me and maybe another guy and the professor. It was really, really, really engaging. And I got to know Islam probably in a way I never would have otherwise known.
Where did you go to school, by the way, for that?
Youngstown State is the college.
Interesting.
I had some phenomenal teachers.
I might ask you offline.
Sure.
Because I might know, like,
the individual.
So maybe I might know him personally, but like an old friend of mine might be married to his daughter.
Could very well be.
I'll ask you offline. I'll right.
Yeah.
I'll ask you when we get off.
Small world.
Finish the recording, but like it's some. But yeah, man, but like, what was yeah, because it's like the academic. There's something really appealing about the academics. I never studied Islam in the academy personally,
Okay.
right? I almost did. I actually was studying. I started before I went to Ohio State. I studied at the University of Toronto, and I was a philosophy major
Okay.
for like a semester, and then just couldn't hack it, man. It was like I was like I couldn't like get through like a Plato would take me 10 pages would take me like 3 hours to get through. But I was thinking about, and I come later. I found out that University of Toronto had like an exceptional Islamic studies department. Uh,
Okay.
and I was kind of thinking about like, oh man, maybe if I knew what I do now, I would have maybe looked at some of these professors, etc. But yeah,
Sure.
so what is there something specific that triggered the interest? Um, or was it something about? Would you say it's something about Islam that was compelling, or was it something about Christianity that you felt there was lacking in it? What was the angle you were coming from?
Truthfully, it was probably a combination of both.
Okay.
Um, there was something missing in the place where I was in Christianity. There were answers that I just wasn't getting. There were questions I have that had that weren't being answered. Something just didn't. It just didn't feel right. Something just it wasn't connecting. It wasn't there. And I think what that did is left me open to other ideas, other religion, other, whatever. So I think with that opening, a lot of those questions that I had, and I really have to give some thought to what those were specifically, but
Hmm.
um, I started finding some of those answers when I started studying Islam.
Hmm.
There was something intuitive, there was something natural about it. There was something, it was easy to grasp and to comprehend.
You mentioned that in the blog as well, like over several posts, like this whole idea of the fitra, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like the oneness of God or Tawheed, and how it's simple. Like most people, they just you don't think about it. They're not like versus whereas, uh, if you ask most Christians to like explain the Trinity, or many of them don't even many like a
Mm-hmm.
lay Christian will often tell you like, yeah, I believe in the Trinity, but I don't pray
Like,
to Jesus, I pray to God. And then you without so they're essentially they're saying something, but their actual belief is like, I believe in a God and I don't believe Jesus is God. That's essentially what that statement is, right?
yeah,
I don't know if
yeah,
you, but
yep.
I think that's very common in like the Christian laity, right? So I found now that a lot of the people who are in the apologetics world are trying to emphasize the Trinity, make the Trinity
Mm-hmm.
something to be proud of, and arguing for that. And I think that if you're and I think that's a smart thing to do, because
Sure.
in this open world of YouTube and podcasting and social media, there's no filter anymore. Like you
None.
can't protect. It's not like our forefathers, you know, who whatever their imam or their pastor or priest told them, they were good with it and they went on farm milking their cows.
Yeah,
You know what I
yep.
mean?
Not anymore.
Yeah, right. So that's now I want to ask, like, you being now
Sure.
you're married to a minister's daughter,
Mm-hmm.
um in the background while you're actually like learning about Islam, and you're just learning because it's interesting. It doesn't sound like you're thinking about why, well, this might be the truth, or are you actually thinking that as well?
Yeah, there was a point in time where I was there. I was giving serious thought to it. Um, it even got to the point that this person who I had met on the forum, she hooked me up with a guy, and I actually traveled to Washington D.C. There's a big mosque in Falls Church, Virginia.
Yeah, Darul Hijra
Uh,
Islamic Center.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
she hooked me up with a guy there.
Okay.
I actually went. I took an entire weekend explicitly for that reason.
Which year was this?
Oh man, had to
Did
be
did
the late 90s,
did
97,
did you
90.
meet the night? Did you meet the imam there? Is that who
I
you
did
went to
not.
meet?
No,
Okay,
no, no. It was just it was a friend of hers.
okay, but was he a scholar or a student of knowledge or? Oh,
I don't remember his name.
yeah,
I'd have to go back. I probably have it journaled somewhere.
right, right,
Um,
okay,
but I did the whole weekend. So I stayed with him. I
yeah,
actually I don't know if there's a specific name, but I wore the garb
the
and the
thobe,
hat.
yeah,
Yeah. And I literally just spent the whole weekend with him. We went out to eat. I went to a
Yeah.
couple, they had a couple guys, scholars or something from Saudi Arabia. They
Mm-hmm.
were teaching. I went to sit down on those. We went to mosques. So I went to Friday, Saturday. I mean, we went to
Yeah.
the prayers. I did the whole gamut. It was really cool. And I told him up front, I said, look, I don't want to give the impression, I don't want to give anyone the impression that, what I'm doing, I'm going to be completely transparent. I don't want them thinking I'm a Muslim, that I'm ready to convert. I don't want them thinking any of that. And he said,
Mm.
oh, no, no, no. He said, you're good, whatever.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I remember sitting, we had gone to a small, it was a prayer service. It was in a strip plaza somewhere. And I'm sitting around this group of Muslims. And one of them threw out the saying about, when Jesus returns, he'll break the cross and kill the pigs. And I finished the sentence for him. And he just sort of did a double take. And especially when he found out I'm actually a Christian who knows this and who could
Mm-hmm.
finish his sentence without
Yeah.
any animosity or anger,
Yeah.
it took him by surprise. It was interesting because all of a sudden at that moment there was a mutual level of respect. I'm like, look, I'm here to learn. I'm not here to do anything else. I want to understand how you believe, why you believe what you believe. And it was a cool experience.
So I'll tell you something. Like, I don't know if you know this. Northern Virginia at that time was like one of the centers of what they call the Salafi movement.
Okay.
And I don't know if are you familiar with the Salafi Dawah or Salafia, that, or
Is
maybe
that
some people call it Wahhabism.
Wahhabism?
In
Yeah.
the
So
as a
here,
pejorative.
I was going to show you, and this is something you'll find a little interesting.
Sure.
See if I can get in front of that.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and it was issued by out of Saudi Arabia.
Right. Yep.
So I understand exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, because you mentioned, so in I'll tell you that there used to before that used to be the spot for a lot of
Okay.
people. I have a friend named Ismail Royer. He's a director now with the at the Religious Freedom Foundation. It's based out of
Okay.
DC. And he's a St. Louis guy who converted to Islam when he was 19, moved
Okay.
out to Northern Virginia, and with a lot of other guys too. And they would just camp out because they would have like these apartments, just like pack them in like sardines and study at a place called, they called the Mahad, but it was the I forgot, the IIE or something. It was in
Okay.
Fairfax. Um, and so they would have like, it was essentially a branch of the Imam Muhammad ibn Saud University in Riyadh,
Yeah.
but it was in
Yeah. Yeah.
Fairfax, and they would have like these Saudi scholars there teaching. So a lot of
That's
that was,
interesting.
so you have this kind of, that was the vibe in Northern Virginia in the late 90s. This kind of, with the petrodollars coming in, 9/11 was
Sure.
a game changer. That changed all that. Like, not Northern, like that area now, I don't really know if Northern Virginia, DC has like an Islamic identity in that sense, from a kind,
Okay.
but in the 90s it was the spot. That's where people would go. That's where you had like some of the top students of knowledge. Obviously at the time I was in high school at the time, and I wasn't like
Yeah.
dialed in, but this is something I come to learn later because of the podcasting that I've done, the talking, to have these conversations with people who like came of age in that time frame. So it's very clear that I think you got a almost
I
like,
was right there in the middle of it.
right,
Yep.
and you got it from, and I myself came to the Salafi movement.
Oh, okay.
So when I first became practicing my own religion, that's kind of what I came into. Um, because of, and it was a well oiled machine, no pun intended.
Right. Right.
Right.
Right.
But that's cool. Okay, so you have this trip to Virginia, and I think, I don't know if you can recall this, but like, one thing about the Salafis that good or bad, is that they are very straight up with you. I think
Hmm.
they're not going to sugarcoat what Islam is or isn't to like get a conversion.
Right. Right.
At least
Right.
that's the impression I had, and that's my own experience with those kind of brothers. So I wanted to get your take on, like it seems like they treated you pretty well, and they had,
I had a fantastic. It was a fantastic. He was a great host.
yeah,
It was just, I have nothing but good to say about it. And he was great because I asked so many questions. I was driving him crazy. He's like,
right,
I don't know, but I'm gonna hear. Let's go to a bookstore. Let's go talk to somebody. Let's go to this teaching. Let's go.
right,
And it was a privilege too to be able to sit in the midst of that and really hear it from their own
Mhm.
mouths and to really, really soak it in.
Mhm.
So yeah, it
So,
was a very, very positive experience.
and let me just to frame this. Were you all are you like an Ohio guy, pretty much born and raised?
Yeah, yeah. I
Okay, okay,
moved away for a little bit, but yeah, I'm an Ohio guy.
cool, nice, nice, nice. So you come back, and then um, I kind of want to jump forward to a little bit. So
Sure,
it seems like a lot of things make sense, but for you, Islam has three. From what I read from your vlog, and maybe you can update it because I don't know what this
sure.
this may have been from 7 years ago too. So
Probably that's probably pretty old. It's been a while since I've really tackled that.
the three things that were your hangups about Islam. Number one,
Hmm.
I think, is the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Right?
Hmm.
I think you mentioned something. It sounds like that because everyone tries to frame him in some different light, right? And and tries to ignore something else in that sense. That was one thing. I'd like to kind of understand that a little bit, like flesh that out a
Sure,
little bit.
sure. Hmm.
Secondly, that I think the age of Aisha, uh,
Hmm.
the mother of the believers, right? And I forget I think the third one was the lack of detail regarding Jesus Christ, if I'm not
Yeah, I mean,
mistaken.
I could break all three of those down a
Sure,
little bit.
but am I right? Were those the three
Yep,
main like
yeah.
issues? Okay.
From my blog, yeah, those are the three.
Yeah. So starting with the Prophet Muhammad, can you explain a little bit about like that a little bit for the listeners to understand where you're coming
I
from
think
there?
I think the problem I had, I could never really get a sense of who he was. I got into the hadith literature a bit.
Hmm.
Um, I could never. It was, I call it pick your own Muhammad, and we do that with Jesus. It's just something that we tend to do. We try to
Hmm.
find our best version of it, but I could never really fully grasp or feel or connect to who he was. It just seemed so complicated and confusing. It seemed like there were so many different traditions out there about him. And like you said, some positive, some bad, depending on where you're coming from.
Hmm.
I just never really could get a feel for who he was. And I know in terms of the faith tradition, the idea is that he is the model, he is the one you imitate, he is the one you emulate. And I could just never fully grasp who that was. And I think that was probably my biggest challenge. The
Hmm.
Quran on its own, I got a pretty good understanding of it, as I had several Muslims tell me, like, dude, you got it. Obviously I don't know everything, but I
Yeah.
had at least the spirit of it, or I at least knew enough about it that I was on the right track.
Right.
But with Muhammad, it was, I couldn't, I just never could make that connection,
Mm.
if
Would
that makes
you?
sense.
Yeah, I hear you. I think it's so there's a organization. I think they do a lot of great work. It's called Celebrate Mercy, right?
Okay.
And it's an organization that seeks to highlight the because the Prophet Muhammad as the Muslims will say from the Quran is like he's the mercy to human rahmatul lil alameen, the mercy to all the worlds, right?
Gotcha.
So that's what the whole celebrate mercy is too. However, at the same time, like we know that he led expeditions and we call
Hmm.
ghazawats and expansions, and he had that military political side to him, right? Um, and sometimes I feel like people there is a I was talking to a friend of mine about this. Maybe like he's like, so how come there's never much emphasis on that? Now, some organizations, what you find out with Muslims is that there's a lot of different organizations that emphasize different things,
Sure.
right? So, like the Sufis will talk about spirituality, right?
Yep.
Right, and they will emphasize the prophet's like love and how he loved God. That's emphasized a lot. You have groups who are like the Islamist groups, the political inclined
Hmm.
groups like Hizb Tahrir or Ikhwan Muslimun, the Muslim Brotherhood. They will focus maybe more on the polity behind him, his
Yep.
thing, right? But I think we've always I find your take interesting. I would say because it's not like a common I haven't heard that issue, so to speak, right? All
Okay.
from now again, I'm talking to Muslims, so we're already Muslim. So
Right.
it's like it isn't a thing. Now, I'll be honest though, as growing up as a kid, I don't know that we were really educated about him other than it was like he was a historical figure. Does that,
Gotcha.
if that makes sense, right?
Sure.
I think for me, it like, and this is the thing about religion that's like really unique, and that this is why this whole thing of conversion is, people talk about conversion from this intellectual point of view, and I think you come to realize that it's not really intellectual exercise, it's a heart,
Absolutely, it
right?
is.
And it's
Yep.
and what people need to understand is that there's personal experiences that people have that drive it. So for
Yep.
me, it was like I would have to say that um the time that it took for me to really connect with him was going to Medina.
Ah, okay.
You know what I'm
Okay.
saying? And and you see that's like I think doing the Hajj in 2015
Ah,
was like for
spectacular.
me like
Okay.
boom, this is like it. You know what I'm saying? Like
I could see that.
because I remember like the thing is you first fly into Medina, right? And then you always, and the thing is, as a kid, and this is something that I don't know if everyone can relate to, but as a Muslim kids growing up, we our parents might have had, there's two pictures we might have in our house. We might have a little
Okay.
picture of the Kaaba in Mecca, and then the
Yep.
green dome of the Prophet's mosque in Medina, right? We see that, right? And so I remember we're like landing, right? And it's like there's this song called by a guy named Dawood Warnsby. He's like a Canadian singer. He's a convert to Islam. He writes these
Okay.
like children's songs. And it's like I remember that song playing in my head. I wasn't listening to it. I'm just like thinking about it. We're landing, and then you go into the Mosque of the Prophet, and then you go through this gate, and there's everyone there from all these nationalities, and you're going through, and then you get, and then you what to do? We do what they call the salawat upon the Prophet, and Abu Bakr and Omar, the two companions, are buried there,
Yep.
and you walk
Okay.
right by it, and then it's like trying to find a spot, and I'm like,
Wow.
this is, and you were like, um, because people will talk about like when you listen to Orientalist accounts or non-Muslim accounts of Muhammad, it's like, oh,
Sure.
he's some historical dude,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But then like there is something about being in that city that is indescribable, and it's almost like unfortunate that non-Muslims can't
Can't go
experience
in.
it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Because
But
I actually
like,
asked, I inquired about that, and I was told, nope,
yeah, I mean,
not happening.
and I'm sure some folks may have like forged their way in or say, or
Sure.
whatever, but to me that was just like, that to me was like it. Like to me
Okay.
that like sealed like that. So then you would get into this practice of you do salawat, and it's like one of my life goals is to see the Prophet in my dreams, because
Wow.
I hear, because and when I've traveled the Muslim world, and then I met like what we call, so there's you probably, I don't know if you're familiar with this hadith translation, this narration where it talks about the scholars or the inheritors of the prophets, right?
Hmm.
And I went to Morocco last year, and
Very cool.
and I'm going to the city called Fez, and Fez is known as the city of saints, and I'm meeting like these elder like
Wow.
scholarly figures who like, I'm like, these are people that you will not like when you start meeting these people, I'm like, it's hard to describe to the average American.
Sure.
I mean, some of them may exist even in America, but you just don't, like, you might have to seek them out, right? But I'm like, this is some next level stuff that you're like envy, almost like jealous. It's like they have nothing, but you're jealous of them. You feel
I
me?
got you. Sure, I do. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So to me, that's the taste. That's what we call the taste. And I was like, they would, and I was like, if this is um and every time they would say, I'm like, what do you advise? And they would all, everyone is like, you give salawat upon the Prophet, you praise the Prophet because that's God's beloved, and then God will bless this, kind of thing, right? And so that's like, and so at that point you're not thinking about like, oh, is it appropriate that he's married to a 6-year-old kind of thing? I mean,
Yeah.
to be honest, for me that's never been a problem. That's probably my own male bias. I'm like part of the patriarchy, and I don't really care.
There's an
You
honest
know what I'm
take.
saying? Like, I'm not like, I could see how a woman might be like,
Sure.
disturbed by that. I can understand it, but like, but that to me is like how it sealed it. But I think a lot of Muslims, to be honest, I think growing up, they don't have that connection to him, right? since you were talking about him, I want to show you something real quick.
Sure.
So this is something so my daughter, she is in a she's 3 years old. She's in this like Islamic pre-K Arabic immersion program. So she had a project where it's called like she's gonna make a poster. Now, kids, the thing is these days, man, the kids' homework is homework for the parents. So like
Pretty
she
much.
has, I don't know if you can see this. It's like a poster.
Yeah.
She says, "I love you, O Rasulullah, O Messenger of Allah, so I follow your Sunnah." And she's making this
Yeah.
poster and stuff. And so I would say for my kids, it's like they sing songs, but it's like most of us growing up, we didn't. Everything
Didn't
about
have that
our
experience.
religion was, if you don't pray, you're going to hell. If you don't do this, you're going to hell. It's all
Pretty
fire
much.
and brimstone, right? And it's just such a turnoff, man. But
Yeah.
like, it's like for me, like, how old was I? I'm 30 now, so I was like 34 years old, born a Muslim, to go to Saudi Arabia, to go to Medina and Mecca, to walk in these historical places. And I think that's the beauty of some of this, is because it's preserved. Like, and then that's that personal experience, and doing the rituals, it just like boom, it all like meshes together, right? So that's stuff that can't be like taught in books. That has to be experienced. And I think religion is an experiential thing at the end of the day, right? And I think that's where
100%.
people sometimes, and that's why, when we talk about conversions and this kind of dialogue, I think people need to understand where the other person's at, because sometimes people are seeking, and then you can have that kind of dialogue, right? But sometimes someone is content. You don't know what they've been through. You don't know what their experience is, right?
Absolutely not, right?
But like if someone's telling me that Jesus came to them in a dream, like, I'm not going to tell them, hey, your dream was fake. I'm like, I mean, what am I going to do, right?
Yep.
And maybe in my own head, I'm like, I can reconcile it somehow, because I have a belief about Jesus Christ and he's alive, and that's possible. And who knows, right?
Who knows? Right.
You know what I'm saying? But that's kind of what the kind of hope to flesh out with your first point there. But I see it though, because I think people emphasize certain things, and then you think. But I think there's also a but I think for us Muslims, we always try to stress that, like, we study things with a teacher. So you cover the basics, and you can ask those questions about these hadith that seem to be like problematic, so to speak, or certain things that, like, for example, the controversial one about the slaughtering of the Jews at the Bani Qurayza, right?
Mm-hmm.
Thing, these things of that sort. Now, I, for one, these things have never bothered me, right? Because I understand the world's a different place back then, and there's things that happen, and I don't even know that it would be. There's things that happen today that our leaders do that they justify, and I'm not even sure if maybe that's what their only recourse of action either. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not really. It doesn't bother me, but again, I'm biased. But I appreciate your honesty, kind of sharing that point of view.
Yeah, and I think the mystery was I can never quite pinpoint it. You talk about some of these other controversial things, and so what I would do when I encounter, and a lot of these come up in polemics. So
right,
someone trying to debate is going to throw those out of, is it some heinous thing? And I would always seek, okay, obviously Muslims don't have a problem with this, because if it's in the traditions and it's something that's taught and it's something that they believe, okay, right. So I want to get as best I can that point of view. Right. Because unless I understand that point of view, I don't really understand what's going on. And then, my bias, and I'm reading into it what I want.
Exactly. So let's talk about the age of Aisha. Is that something that, kind of when you first came across, that was like, whoa, boom, this is like not gonna fly?
Yeah, it's a shocker. I don't think today it's as bothersome.
Yeah.
Because like you said, the time was different, the culture was different. I don't know enough about that time, about that culture, to really cast judgment. It just, the world we live in today, having daughters and grandkids, it's really strange.
Yeah.
That one doesn't trouble me as much, but it still doesn't, it doesn't sit well. It doesn't resonate.
How much of that is this, like, because I think the notion of Christ is this like pure figure who like never engaged in. So I think as a Christian, would you say there's almost like this tendency to want to compare Jesus to Muhammad?
Yeah, absolutely there is.
Okay.
And I learned a long time ago, because, as a Christian, we call Jesus the Word. Well, Jesus would be better off compared to the Quran, and the Hadith would be better off compared to the New Testament. So that's how I look at that. So I don't compare Muhammad to Jesus because it's just the way the religions unfolded. They're
Mhm.
just different like that, and
Yeah.
it's not the same comparison. And you're absolutely right. So if a Christian is coming at Islam and Muhammad from the point of view of having that view of Jesus, well, where do you go with that?
How do you so it I see where I that makes a lot of sense. I always say that the New Test but but the Jesus to the Quran comparison, I guess but we know about Jesus from the Christian point
Mm-hmm.
of view and really
Sure.
from most points of view from the New Testament, right?
Yes.
So you can't disconnect Jesus from the New Testament in
No,
reality.
no, not at all. And what happens, and if I go off, feel free to
Sure.
bring me down. But
Yeah.
my understanding is, we read the word is what the Bible is referred to
Mm,
get to the word, which is to understand who Christ is with a
mm,
capital W.
mm.
So it is through the Bible that we come to know who He is, which is sometimes where it can get fuzzy and convoluted. Um, but in that sense, the real essence of the truth is the Word, which is the same as Jesus. Even though
Mm,
there was a historical Jesus who walked the earth, whose story is told in the New Testament,
mm.
I view the Bible. We get through the Bible to get to Him. Is
I
what
see.
what it's about. And so I think on that level, you've created or you have this view of Jesus as the Word, and if the Quran is viewed as the Word, I think it's on that level that we're making that comparison.
I hear you. So, would it be fair to say, because this is something I've never really understood, is that there's because like as you know from my interview with Dr. Hugo Mendez, the idea of um inerrancy in the New Test in the Bible essentially is except not errancy, sorry, is accepted. It's more like the general themes are there, but the idea is that the Holy Spirit guides you through the imperfections, so to speak. Is and then that's why it's a living. So when you're reading the Bible, like you're being guided by the Holy Spirit, and then that leads you to the Word. Is that did
Yeah,
I
I would.
articulate?
That's actually well put.
Okay,
I'm not an inerrantist. There are some who think that God spoke King James English and that every single word was spoken exactly as we see it in the King James Bible. I'm not one of those. I think that was a backlash to the scientific revolution,
mm.
in the late 1800s and the 1900s. I think that was sort of an extreme reaction to that. But yeah, the way you phrased it, that was very well put. That would be.
You probably can't be. I mean, you studied religion in like in a secular university, so
Mhm.
they're not. I don't think there's many like inerrancy kind of.
No, no, no. I got
Yeah.
the hardcore. I got they call it biblical criticism. It
Okay,
doesn't mean exactly what it sounds like, but
right,
it's still pick it apart and try to figure
sure,
out the historical context,
right.
that kind of stuff.
Okay. So then, the last point is like I think as far as like why it's, and then we can go more into Christianity a little bit.
Sure.
Was this because, and I can respect this too, is this idea of you know Christians, Jesus is it. At the end of the day, Christianity is Jesus centric, right? Would you say?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it is through him,
Okay. Um,
which is
so
obviously where it gets a little complicated.
right. So it seems like some of your concerns, like when you read the Quran, there would be. It seems like Jesus was kind of was mentioned, but again, like not really glossed over. I guess in this is that the right word?
Yeah, I mean, I came to understand. So I think I came to understand the general framework for what a prophet was
Yeah.
in
Right.
Islam. So Jesus, obviously, in Islam was a prophet. He was one of the main prophets, if you will, but he
Mm-hmm.
was just, meaning he was only human, a
Mm-hmm.
prophet. And I think where so one of the translations I picked up, I have all kinds of weird offshoot tangent stories as we all do, but I was
Sure.
interviewed. My professor of Islam looked me up. I was interviewed by ABC News, and this would
Okay.
have been I'm thinking it must have been after 9/11. I
Sure.
can't, it had to have been. Yeah, because CAR
Yeah. The
was it
Council of American Islamic Relations.
Economic Relations.
Yeah.
This is when they were doing their push to get translations of the Bible out to whoever wanted one. So people had a better understanding of it.
Translation of the Quran.
Yeah.
You said
So the
translation. Okay.
initial
Right.
um, the version that was supposed to have been sent, which they either couldn't pull it off or they sold out or got rid of them all, was from Yusuf Ali, which is a very popular translation. The one I ended up getting was from Muhammad Assad.
Okay.
If you know who he is, he was a Jewish convert to Islam. I was drawn to what he said and his seems to be, I can't say fringe because that's probably not right, but it didn't seem to be popular or a common interpretation of some of these things, one of which was his interpretation of Surah 4, I think it's 157, 58, where it talks about the crucifixion of Jesus. His understanding would be how I would understand it. But then I found in the traditions, or I don't know if it was from scholars over time, the story about him being lifted alive up into heaven and he's still up there somewhere. However, that I'm not exactly sure how that is well explained, but then he comes back, at the end times, and that was where they break the cross, kill the pigs, and pay the tax. So there was this conflict. So Muhammad Assad is saying, nope, he died, done deal, that's it. So this whole tradition of him coming back alive, that doesn't exist. That's not the real interpretation. And then of course you've got the variant interpret. So I never, just kind of like with Muhammad, I never got a really clear, solid understanding of the belief of what happened with Jesus. Was Judas put up there as a substitute? There were variant traditions of what really happened. And it sort of puzzled me. And I think that's possibly where my bias and my background and my upbringing comes in, is I'm looking for that in Islam and it's not really there.
I see.
So
that makes, okay. Yeah, it's I haven't studied the obviously you're right. The opinion that Jesus actually died and is not returning is considered to be a fringe opinion.
Okay.
Right. Within like the orthodoxy, what we call like within Sunniism.
Sunni.
Yeah. There now, as far as how the crucifixion took place and all that stuff and the resurrection, there's all kinds of theories because the Quran is very open-ended on that. If you actually look at it, it's the way, and it's funny, if you have a chance, there's a scholar by the name of Dr. Ali Atai, out of Zaytuna College. He's a Muslim. I call him a Muslim biblicist. He did his PhD at the Graduate Theological Seminary in Berkeley. And he is probably, and he studied Greek and Hebrew. He actually grew up with a love for the New Testament. He used to, but I've done a podcast with him. He's also, I also hosted him on another podcast called the Mad Mamluks, which is my original Muslim only podcast. But we talk about, it's called Revisiting. I'll send you the links.
Yeah, please do. I'd like to see that.
He has like these theories, and it's not like he believes in some of the theories, but it's like these are the theories that are out there. But the thing is that this whole idea of the crucifixion is that if I read the verse, it seems like the Jews say we killed Isa, the son of Mary, Jesus, the son of Mary. They did not kill him, nor did they crucify him. But it was made to appear so. And I think this whole, it was made to appear so, is kind of like this, like cliffhanger kind of thing. Like, well, what happened? Like, because it opens it leaves it open. So, and then you get into this whole notion of the return of Christ. That's explicitly, which is from the Hadith tradition, right?
Exactly, right.
That's where that's from, right?
Yep.
Now, some scholars will look at the Quranic exegesis and how they talk about how Jesus speaks, and they cite how he speaks in both young and old age. And they say his old age is referring to him returning. Right.
Okay.
And it's something you have to like, and this is why language, and I haven't studied Arabic to the level I need to. I've taken like courses in it over a few years, but that's when you like without language, man, it's just like there's so much you're always missing it. So you're relying on. So but to me again, but I can see though as a Christian, Jesus is important, and I was listening to an interview. A friend of mine, she was raised Roman Catholic. She's from a Latino background, and she became Muslim in high school. And I don't know if you've ever like seen a conversion, but like when a Christian converts, often the imam will say that not only I believe that there's no God but Allah and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and I believe that Jesus, Isa ibn Maryam, Jesus, the son of Mary, is a prophet of God and the slave of God, and he's born and he's the word of God and from the virgin birth. And that's they actually add that to many of the Christian
Oh, that's
testimonies
interesting. Okay.
because it's like they want them to feel like, well, Jesus is still there for you,
He's
right?
important.
It's a
Hmm.
he's still a central figure. But at the same time, I can see that like we're not talking about Jesus every week in Friday sermons.
Right, right, right.
And in church, there is mention of Jesus. So if you were to like, if I'm going to be completely honest, yeah, Muslims talk about Jesus less than Christians.
Sure.
It's
Oh,
just a
makes perfect
fact.
sense.
You
That
know,
makes perfect sense.
it's
Right.
just a fact, right? And I think
Yep.
that's where and some Muslims who I speak to who converted from Christianity, they will say, listen, I mean, I have a friend of mine, he was of a Portuguese background. He's like telling me like, um, listen, I used to read the Bible up until the day I converted. But like now then I became Muslim. And the Prophet Muhammad to me is the central figure. And I still love
Yeah.
Jesus, but like that's part of the deal. That's like it's just like, it's so I think that's where but like but I do have an issue when some like Christian ministers will say, well, he's a mere prophet. And I'm like, we don't say he's a mere prophet. Mere is
No,
not, that's an adjective that you guys threw in, that people are
sure it
throwing
is.
in. Because, nah, because he has a very special place in our tradition. Because if we believe he's the Messiah and he's coming back to rule the world and like he's ruling the entire world, like
Yep.
that ain't no joke. You know what I'm
Yeah, and
saying?
that's a lack of understanding or an intentional ignorance of
Yeah.
what your understanding of prophethood actually is.
However, though, it's still not him, but he's not divine. He's not God. And so some people
Right.
will be like, well, you're still lowering his status, right?
Right.
Um,
Well, that's like you said when you're referring to where you're coming from.
exactly. Right,
Yeah.
right. And I think at the end of the day, I always tell my Christian friends, like, listen, we both love Jesus. We can agree on that. And maybe at the end of the day, we won't know until the day of, we will see at the end of days, I guess, who had the right position. Because at the same time, I always tell people, like, listen, if Jesus is not God, let's say hypothetically speaking, and you call him God, he would probably be offended by that.
Might be a problem.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So just because, like for me, if somebody started worshiping me, I wouldn't be cool with that. You know what I'm saying?
Be a little
But
weird.
like, yeah, I see your point of view, and again, it goes back to this emotional connection. But anyways,
Sure.
let's move off Islam. I want to get more into Christianity. So, how would you identify yourself these days, as far as your Christian beliefs go?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know that I would call it anything. I mean, it's there, but I wouldn't give it a tag as such. I'll just put it out there. I definitely wouldn't go with evangelical. To me, that's
Okay.
a bad word now. Um, but I'm just sort of at an in between searching, looking for maybe somewhere to land kind of stage.
Yeah.
I don't know that I need an identity as such, a denomination or a tag.
Mm.
I guess my whole take is I should be living my life in such a way that it's reflective of what I believe. There should be something about me that is different or that stands out.
Hmm. I gotcha. I mean, do you believe so? Um, what are your thoughts on like because one thing I gathered from your blog is that you went through a phase or where you believe that obviously you hold Jesus in his high regard. He's the model, but
Yep.
he's not the God. He's not like ontologically the same as the Father, so to speak.
Yeah, and
What
I
are your
think what's
thoughts on that?
changed, well, I
Yeah.
think what's changed over, and I can't remember, I'd have to go back and look at the last really hardcore date when I was really, really into it. And it's funny because when I was doing that blog, I was working two jobs, and that blog, most of it was written. I worked a job on the weekends
Hmm.
where I had a lot of downtime. I was basically a night watchman. So I had a whole lot of time all night to do a lot of stuff. And that's where I did a lot of reading, studying. It was a great opportunity. And that's where I did most of my blogging.
Hmm.
And then I got down to one job, and I think it's sort of faded since then. But I think my framework now is more purely Trinitarian, I guess you would say.
Hmm.
Um, So I think theologically, that's probably what resonates the most, which therefore would make it such that ontologically, and I guess it depends on how you explain it, that Jesus himself is one and the same with, we would say, the Father,
Sure, exactly. Okay.
based on the creeds.
Hmm. But what led you to that journey from oneness or Unitarianism to Trinitarianism, so to speak? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think it's just the book that changed everything for me. And I don't remember where I stumbled across it. I've read so many different books and they took me down different paths. It's a book called The Roots of Christian Mysticism, and it's by a guy named Olivier Clément. He's French. And it got into the writings of the early, they call them the church fathers.
Hmm.
So these first generations that came after the apostles, and then it would have been the next couple of generations over the next couple hundred years, who would be the ones that were foundational in writing the creeds and really working out what is orthodox versus what doesn't fit. And it was really a full immersion into those. And the book just highlights certain passages from certain fathers and certain books. And then the next step was I started actually reading the works of these church fathers. And I think it was there because they really do a great job of just hashing out what that actually means when you say, for example, the Trinity or the God man or Jesus is the same as the Father, one essence, what that actually means. And I think what happened was slowly over time, the transition was in really fully immersing myself in their works.
Hmm.
And I think once that floodgate opened, I've been walking down that path ever since. And to your point you brought up earlier, in a lot of the churches today, especially these non-denominational or neo-denomination, the ones that don't have a denomination, they pay lip service to these fundamental foundation doctrines, but there's no mention of it in church. And so you've got a lot of these churches are theologically sort of loosey-goosey, and it all rides on the pastor of these churches. And I think there's real hunger that a lot of people have for exactly what you said, and why they're trying to bring it back is because a lot of people don't really have a good foundation. So when the wind blows this way, it blows this way, we sort of lose our bearings. And I think that's what's drawn me, slowly towards Eastern Orthodoxy, because that is these church fathers. That's the tradition they came out of.
Right, right.
So if that makes sense, I think
Yeah.
if I were to break it down, that's really sort of how it happened.
Do you have a because one thing you say is that there's I don't know if you said this in a blog or not, but we earlier mentioned like the simplicity of Islam is like
Mm-hmm.
the oneness, right?
Yep.
So I could see why you would have also embraced the oneness version of Christianity or Unitarianism, or which most Trinitarians will tell you they're not really Christians. So let me ask you that first. Do you take a hard stance towards non-Trinitarians as saying like, oh, they're not Christians, or is that some because that's what the academic or the pastor or
Sure.
the by the book response would be, right? But is that something you are willing to like also go with, or is that something you're kind of like, well, no, that's an interpretation that may have some validity, but it's just not what I'm agreeing with right now.
Yeah, I'm not one to say what somebody else believes. I'm not going to say I'm right. I'm not a big fan of, and I see this in a lot of maybe churches or religious circles. There's this interest that people I want to be right, which to me is an intellectual thing. I want to be right. And if I'm right, you're therefore wrong. And I see a lot of these discussions take place on that level. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
not one to say, well, you believe such and such. When people throw out the word, for example, heretic, I would never use that word against anyone else in their journey. I mean, because everybody's at a different place in their journey.
Mm-hmm.
It's how I look at it. So no, I'm not one to take a hardline stance and say, I'm right, you're wrong. That's not the way I work. Everybody's at a different place. I believe in mercy.
I hear you. I mean that makes sense. Like the whole idea of people being their own place, but at the same time, I feel like there's a there are lines to be drawn in the sense to
Sure.
like otherwise people okay so because people ask so I'll give you an example from the Muslim point of view, right? You're from the Sunnis and the Shiites, right?
Hmm.
Example. Now, Sunnis, we believe that Shiites in general are Muslims, right? No issue there. We believe that they had some error in their understandings, but in general, we're not like, if I meet a Shiite person, I'm gonna still give them the Psalms, give them the rights of the Muslims. Now there's this group called the Ahmadiyya or the Qadianis. Okay, I don't know if you've heard
I've
of them.
heard of them.
You know, like, so I don't know if you've ever heard of the guy Nabil Qureshi.
Hmm.
You know, he was a Qadiani guy who converted to Christianity. And he was
Okay.
like big in the apologetic scene. And he actually passed away of stomach cancer at a pretty young age. But but the Qadianis, they are kind of like, as explained, like the Mormons of Islam, because they have a
Okay.
prophet who they believed in a Messiah or a prophet figure from India. I think from Punjab. That's the reason, in India, from the 1800s,
Okay.
right? And in Islam, and within like the framework of orthodoxy in Islam, is like the Prophet Muhammad is the final prophet. That's like,
That's it.
you know, because, and the way we see it is that there were other like prophets that tried to prop up even during his own lifetime, and that set precedence. And it was explicit there, right? So for us, it's like, all right, these dudes aren't Muslim. That's straight. Like, that's like the Nation of Islam, for example, like the Elijah Muhammad, that organization, they
Sure.
believe that like God entered the world in the form of a man called W.D. Fard, and his.
Yep.
So I'm like, they say they're Muslims, but they're not. Like, you know what I'm saying? So you have to have a thing. Now, I see what you're saying, that people, when you see somebody on the street who is
Yeah.
of that, and there's probably a wisdom to deal with them as well, because they think they're
Yeah.
Muslim,
Yeah. You're
right?
not going to go right into attack mode.
You'd be like, hey, you know, you're upon like, I mean, we have a tendency to do it as people,
Yeah.
but like, so I think we're in agreement here. It is like, yeah, there is a framework of what the Orthodox creed is,
I definitely
right?
agree with that. Sure.
And you know that has to, if we allow that to just deviate and be malleable, then we really have like compromised some of our own faith, right? At the same time, though, people, we don't know like what there is. Sometimes, and one thing I struggle with, and I'm going to actually do an episode of, with like these Qadiani guys, they have a certain element to them that it's hard to trust them in a sense, and
Okay.
that's a side. I'll have you
Yeah.
tune into that show so you can elaborate. But that's kind of what I was gonna get at, because most, when I spoke to like my Pentecostal like pastor friend, I was like, "Do you believe like Dr. Tail? You would say Tuggy's not a Christian, right?" He's like, "Yeah, that's right. I wouldn't say he's a Christian because he denies the Trinity, and the Trinity is like is central to Christianity, right? So to speak. Like, so I was just curious on that whole take. But have you had do you ever try to wrestle with the whole intellectual part of the Trinity, where it's like, how can this, or is this something like you're at peace with it, and that's what makes the most sense to you right now?
Well, it's to me, it's a strange thing because I haven't. I always tell my wife, and it drives her crazy. I have an engineering brain. It's just the way I look at things.
Yep.
So everything, it's got to be rational and intellectual, and it's got to be broken down into bits and parts, and I have to be able to make sense of it. I think the paradox in where I'm at now is, and I think Eastern Orthodoxy embraces this, is this openness to the mystery. Something you were saying made me think. There's a guy I listened to. His name is Henry Patrick Reardon. Very
Okay.
interesting. I listened to some of his seminars and podcasts, but he says doctrine, for example, is not to explain to you what the truth is. The only purpose doctrine serves, or the creeds serve, he says, it's kind of like the highway. We're going to give you the boundaries, and all we're going to do is we're going to keep it so you don't veer off the highway.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else, he said, we're not going to explain it to you. Now, obviously, there's some explanation in that, but I think it's this openness to the mystery. And I think what's happened to me over time, especially in regards to the Trinity, is it's more like a dance. Some of the early church fathers talk about it's like a puzzle. As soon as I think of one, as in one God, the three are there: Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And it's sort of like this back and forth. It's this dance. So you can never really pin it down intellectually. And I can't say that I'm not at peace with it,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that mystery and that dance sort of just opens you up and it expands you. And I guess you would say you enter into that mystery. because you do. You think of the one, there's the three, and the two go
Mm.
hand in hand, which is really can be frustrating, especially if you're trying to grasp it intellectually, because you're going, that makes no sense.
Right. Yeah. Are you familiar with Dr. William Lane Craig?
A little bit. I know the name. I know he's big into
Yeah.
polemics and
Well, he's a philosopher. But it's funny because he takes I think he's known for what they call the Kalam cosmological argument, right?
okay.
Which is something he took from Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, who was like a well-known
Ghazali, yeah.
Islamic theologian, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so and so when you follow the Kalam argument through, it like one of what happens is like it necessitates like this oneness of God, right? But then it's like, but I guess Christians, you guys, Trinitarians, you guys believe that God is one, but it's a three-person kind of thing. But it's like
Right.
when I look at the Kalam argument, I'm like, yeah, but so this is like if you were somewhere to ask me like, well, why Maheen, why couldn't like this like some of the honest questions I'll say is like the Kalam argument is one of the reasons I couldn't accept the Trinity personally because when you walk it down and all of a sudden at the very end it's like you change the rules because you change the logic, you logical progression kind of thing, right? um you know what I'm saying? So that's why I was like so to me that's why I think that's why I resonate with Tuggy and Buzzard. It's like because I'm like the Unitarians to me are like, if I was, let's say like, if someone were to force me, like, hey, if you weren't Muslim, what else would you be, right?
Yeah.
I'm like that would make more sense to me. I would say though, as far as Trinitarianism goes, I think that the Eastern tradition and Roman Catholicism are the ones to go with because I don't understand how Protestants, like the hardcore, especially the hardcore, like non-denominational types, who like
Mm-hmm.
just hammer the Catholics, and call, can be. It's like they're cherry picking the church tradition when
If
it's
they're, yeah, well,
necessary.
in all honesty, even if they're aware of it at all,
Right.
I think one of the problems, and I talk to my wife about this all the time, about with Protestantism, especially modern.
Mm-hmm.
I can't speak of Lutheran, some of the older Protestant denominations, but some of the newer ones, they have no foundation. The pastor, it's a word from the pastor. The pastor is really great. He's a great speaker. He's dynamic. The church grows. It gets really big, and then when that pastor is gone, the church is gone. So I think in a lot of these cases, these roots are completely absent. So if that's the case and they're bashing Catholics or they're bashing these older traditions, they're throwing the proverbial baby with the bathwater. And I'm like, well, what do you have to stand on? These are the ones that built this tradition upon which you stand. So for you to bash them, you're missing out.
So when you talk about, but this is like when you look at it's interesting you're going to the Eastern Church. I have a friend who I the listeners will know this, and it's not, I know they get tired of my old the same. They hear the same me going pulling back from the same things. A couple years ago, I took a course called Alpha.
Okay.
I don't know if you ever heard of Nicky Gumbel.
Mm-hmm.
He was an attorney out in London, in England somewhere, and he started this course in the '70s to help Christians teach Christians basic theology, basically, right? And he made it a way that any church could absorb it. So I took a course in a non-denominational church a couple years back. I became friends with a guy, a Nigerian guy, who was attending that church, but he'd also tell me that his frustrations with like American Christianity, where the church would be like, okay, people went because it was a good community, and that's really
Mm-hmm.
important because that's what people like go for. I mean, you're looking for like-minded people, etc. And people aren't really interested in the intellectual dialogue or the
Mm-hmm.
history. They want to do something. They want to feel good, right? They want to feel like they're connected to the divine, and that's it. Most people, unfortunately or fortunately, aren't interested in like doing that homework and research, so to speak. But
Sure.
it's just the nature of but he says that's his gripe about like Christianity in America is that it seems to be like this kind of interesting identity where it's like influxed with like this Republican
Oh
politics
boy.
and which is and
Oh yeah.
it's funny because I was listening. I don't know if you ever heard of Pastor Bob Roberts. He's down in
Mm-mm.
Texas, evangelical guy. He's got a podcast called the Bold Love Podcast. He interviews people who are Christian, but also Muslims. He's got like some like some of his Muslim friends are like higher ups in the Islamic community in North America, and
Yeah.
so he was talking about kind of reminiscing, like, man, the evangelicals, man, we kind of messed up as far as our political affiliations, man.
Yeah.
It, it, it's
Oh,
it's it's like when it came to like Trump and having to account for like some of the crazy things he would say, and you'd be like, how's a Christian gonna be for it? And the response, I would talk to them, some of them openly. They'd be like, well, he's better than Biden. Biden just wants to kill babies.
it's an agenda.
You know what I'm saying?
It's the
And
agenda. Yeah, absolutely.
that kind of thing.
Yeah, I
But
remember
you know,
after 9/11,
yeah,
I went, and it's interesting because I was actively attending my local mosque um, during that time. In fact, I attended mosque the first Friday after 9/11,
okay,
which was interesting. But because of I was at least present, and because of my professor, I was invited to talk to a group of people, and I stumbled across a book by a guy named C. Eric Lincoln, and he called that Americanity, is what he called it. And it's this hardcore meshing of America, nationalism, politics, and Christianity. And it's really one and the same. And it's really challenging to separate the two. That's a common gripe that I have. It's the same thing because they become so fused together, it's really tough to tell which is which.
mm-hmm.
So after the 2016 election, and especially after leading up to 2020, yeah, I think a lot of these churches, I think they've got some cleaning up to do if they can.
Yeah, and I bet that would be, you would probably find that in the Muslim world itself in some ways. I know you talk about some of the, maybe like the atrocities that are attributed to like the Ottoman Empire, right? In throughout its history and stuff. And I think, but with Islam, I think we seem to have like we look at it as a, like, it's funny because some of the people from the polemics point of view will say, well, Muslim Islam is a political ideology, it's not a religion. And I was like, well, there
Both,
is a political, yeah, it's
sure, aspect to
definitely,
it.
yeah, absolutely. And I think those of our Muslims, we actually embrace like this idea of like a state, and the Khilafah and all these things are
Mm-hmm.
integral to our understanding. It's not like something we just like, and the way and I'm not one, my take, and people will ask me like, well, do you believe in the Khilafah or the state? And I'm like, listen, I believe in the concept of it, in the sense
The
of,
idea
if
of it,
someone
sure.
asks, right? And the pastor, the Pentecostal, we were having lunch, and he was like, well, that would be my gripe. It's like, it's so integral, like you can't even practice your religion right now because you don't have one, right? And that would say that the religion is false because et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, well, listen, there's abrogations for everything, right? Like if I am a diabetic, I can't fast, right? There are legal theories out there for living in non-Muslim lands as minorities,
Yeah,
even
I
when we
got you.
had a state. So we just apply those. It's like the state, the way I look at it, is a gift from God. When the Muslims abuse the rights of the state and abuse because we believe that everything comes from God. I think we all, people of faith, would agree with that.
Right.
But we're endowed as rulers over a people, and then we're oppressive to them, or we do not like do things the right way, then we will lose the state. It's
You
pretty, to
lose the
me, it's pretty
state.
cut and dry. It's
Pretty
like
clear,
when
sure.
and I think that's kind of how I look at it. But I wanted to get your take as we wrap up here about, like, in
Sure.
general, like, um we were talking offline about the average mindset towards religion, like in like blue collar, in manufacturing factories, and as we
Oh
as
yeah,
we
yeah,
we, we
yep.
both came from those, we both come from those backgrounds. You don't see in the corporate elite. If you're, I bet if you're in Wall Street, you're probably not. They're probably not talking about religion at the investment banking floor. at Goldman
Probably not.
Sachs. But
I can't envision that. Maybe, I don't know, but yeah, I would have a hard time seeing that.
yeah, but like, do you like? There's certainly a sentiment of religiosity you find within like the factories, the steel mills, and these kind of things. Can you comment in general on why you think that is, or or what your personal experience has been with people in that sense?
Well, that's a great that's a great question. I would venture to say, from like Wall Street and the white collar, I think probably what I envision is at that level they're a little more comfortable in terms of maybe wealth or worldly goods or where they live. There's probably a level of comfort, and perhaps a little more individualism at that, more self-sufficiency. I'm on my own. I call my own shots. I'm the man, whatever that is. Um, and there's a danger in that because the more self-sufficient and the more comfortable you become, it's really easy to lose sight of who your maker is.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps in the manufacturing world, you don't have that. It's more of a struggle. It's more work. You're more communal. You've been on the shop floor. I mean, it's to me, it's a lot more communal in nature. And I think you're probably a little more grounded, a little more humble. Not to say that everybody in Wall Street's not humble, but I think when you get into that and then you get into the struggles, and where there's struggles, there's people looking for meaning, looking for solutions, looking for hope, looking for a way out, whatever that may be. And I think that's where you start to find people looking up, if you will.
That's a good point. So a couple of things. My take on it is that when you work to get on Wall Street, first of all, you're in investment banking. That becomes your life. Like, mm-hmm. I mean, in manufacturing, we can get people work long hours in manufacturing as well. But like with bankers, for example, or people in these kind of corporate, these grinder private equity firms, it's like they're working nonstop. It's almost to the point where their career has become their religion.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's one way I look at it. And then on the flip side is like, you're right. There's it's like when you're in a mill pulpit, right? You're working an 8-hour shift or 12-hour shift, and you're an operator in a hot mill or a blast furnace or whatever, and you have time. A lot of times it's like it's rote. You're going through the same kind of motions. And you have people to talk to, and and you always are, shooting the shit about something, right? And you're kind of just like, things just pop up here and there, right? And then you start to like open up, because that's the one thing, like the mill, like they say politics and religion, you can't bring it to the workplace, but in the mill, it wasn't.
You sure can.
It was, they were pretty, people were open about their politics, they're open about their religion. I mean, and it's just the nature. The other thing I would say is that, like, in the steel industry, it's unfortunate that there are fatalities.
There are. Mm-hmm.
And I remember at my old company, we'd have like World Health and Safety Day. The union would host like a memorial service for all the people who had died at that plant in its history. And my plant was in existence like the 1890s, where I worked.
Wow.
So they would like read it off at the moment of silence. And so it wasn't, and it's like this whole thing. I saw this video on TikTok where, how do you give condolences to like an atheist? And it's just like, you can't say, well, they're in a better place right now. You'd be like, well, yeah, so I'm sorry for the passing of your loved one into, well, actually, you don't believe it. You can't really believe in love, because I'm sorry for the transition of your person into like these molecules, and how they've become a matter and they're no longer in this state right anymore. Kind of thing. And I like saw this on, but it's just TikTok, like, so yeah, it encourages this kind of, this thing. Some of like my best relationships at work have been like talking about religion. It's just like, it's come about that. It's just, people ask. I remember when I first started working in the mills, first time I'd asked to go to Friday prayer. Like my boss would be like, I've never heard of that. Like, is this something like you're trying to get out of work? Kind of thing. And I'm like, trust me, man, these sermons are so boring. I'd rather be at work.
I'd rather be at work. Oh, what a good conversation. That's great.
You know what I mean? Or like sometimes, like, I gotta pray at at the office, right? Because the five prayers, and
Yep.
and when we so right now I work in healthcare, and I share an office with a Christian buddy of mine, and I was talking to him. I'm like, hey man, I gotta find a place to do ablution when it gets cold, because what I would do is because I wash my feet. A lot of Muslims, they follow like an
Okay.
opinion where you wipe over the socks. I follow a stricter opinion where I
So you
wash
wash
my
your feet.
feet. So I would go outside. There's a patio, and I would do it. In the fall, that's fine. It's snowing right
Wintertime.
now in Chicago. I'm not going
Yeah.
outside washing my feet.
Yep.
So he was like, "Hey man, why don't you like do a get a cat litter box, and you could do ablution, at your desk." Because I just don't like the idea of sticking my foot in a public sink, personally.
Sure. I
Also,
understand that.
I'm not
Yeah.
I'm not that flexible either. So it's
Gotcha.
like the awkward Muslim thing where you're in the office, and like you got your foot in the sink, and the VP walks in.
Of course.
Right? So yeah, so it's funny because you have these dialogues, and then people like, yeah, people like are and so I basically am telling you, I learned how to do like be more efficient with my ablution at work from my Christian coworker who I share an office with. So
Yeah, and
yeah,
the cool thing about that is,
man.
I think a lot of times we look at people of other faith traditions. In fact, the professor that I studied under said the same thing. He's from Pakistan, and he said, he had a certain view of Christians,
Mm.
and then when he ended up in America, his entire perception of what Christians were all about changed because he met some. So, like what you just brought up, that's a great chance for you to meet and see each other as on a human level. You see one another. So that dialogue with your friend, in the office is a
Yeah,
really cool thing, because now you're not just some idea.
yeah,
You're a very real flesh and blood person with this belief system. And it's a great opportunity for someone to see that.
yeah. Cool. Absolutely. Well, Art, is there anything else you wanted to like mention or say before we wrap up here?
No, it's been fun. I really appreciate it. Like I said, it took me about 6 months to see your comment.
All right.
I
Well,
think you left it in July or something. I might have seen it in December. So I was grateful that you emailed back. I thought that was really cool. But no, this is
absolutely.
this is great.
Yeah, well, it was a really enjoyable. I think the people will get a lot of benefit out of this. If is your so are is your blog still active? Do you still
It
post
is.
it?
You'll see every so often I got a post up on there.
it
I don't know. Maybe I'll revisit and spend some time there. I think
it's
what happens over time is life goes on, or I hate to say it, but maybe it doesn't seem there's a lot of interest. I love questions,
yeah,
which is probably why I gravitated to Quora. I mean, these questions just make you think, and it really
mhm,
makes you flesh out things that you believe.
yeah.
So yeah, but it's still on. It's still active.
Do you have any questions for me or about Muslims or Islam that you want to bring up before we wrap up, or are you
No, like I said, I really appreciate. This is great. I've enjoyed talking to you.
cool?
It's great. I haven't done this in a long time. This is refreshing.
Yeah,
I
absolutely,
appreciate your perspectives and your take, and I love the fact that you're talking to people, from all different walks of life. I think the world needs a lot more of that,
absolutely,
because
absolutely.
now
Yeah.
we meet as human beings, and this is
Right.
this is good.
Yeah. I mean, it's a harder thing to do, but like it's the work that needs to be done. Right. It's
Sure,
easier just to be a bigot, to be honest.
absolutely.
And to stay in
Just
your
get your echo
bubble.
chambers, and this
Yeah.
is what I
Right.
believe, and yeah,
And I like these people they're all heathens and they're all going to hell. So why are we dealing with them? And et cetera, et cetera. No, that's but yeah, it's something that I enjoy. It's something that like
that's great.
that's the whole premise of the show is like I want to understand like it's like why do people believe they believe their backstory shares a lot. It's kind of like and I always tell people that like I was thinking my own journey. I was like that's there's circumstances that were at play that directed me one way versus the other. And sometimes you think about those circumstances. I'm like looking back. I'm like, sometimes it's like it might be like a guy you met for like 15 minutes one time 20 years ago,
Yeah,
right?
but he
And so
impacted you.
yeah, absolutely. Your blog is spiritualmutt.blogspot.com.
Yes.
Is that it? Okay, gotcha. Well, I'll link it in the show notes for our
Okay,
listeners out
fantastic.
there. You can hit me up at info@sultansandsneakers.com. That you can view this video on YouTube, and it'll be up on the audio podcast apps. Um, where you can check it out. If yeah, and yeah, for sure. And follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I'm Sultans and Sneakers, SNKRS on Twitter, just because of the character limitations, for sure. So special guest Art from Spiritual Mutt. I'm your host, Mahi the podcaster, signing off. By the way, Art, stay on real quick. I just want to Actually,
Sure.
a quick question, real quick, before we
Oh,
bounce.
that's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and
Yep.
then listeners, we'll see you next time. Peace.